Hi, so everybody, I'm Ron Brash. I'm VP of Industrial Cybersecurity at Exiger. Sounds like a really fancy title, but really what it just means is I've helped solve a lot of problems with a lot of great people and been around the world helping solve problems. But we're all friends, and the whole idea is to keep the water flowing, power on, and keep economies going. And that's really what I like to persevere for. So um, I like to keep things fun. We're in the middle of the Canadian playoffs for the National Hockey League right now. But something, even though I cannot skate, and I wish I could, something I've learned from watching others play hockey is that hockey really comes down to those, not just with innate talent, but also the fundamentals. And this is true for just about every sport out there. From a quote from Daniel Cormier is, you don't get to the highest level of sport without having the basics in order. And this is something Mike and I can joust about regularly, which is, most orgs really need the basics, but they struggle for various different reasons. But that kind of brought us back to this concept of making backups more than a recovery mechanism, because what we learned was there's a whole engineering art to making software great, for deploying machine cells that are secure, for doing secure deployments, and making sure what crosses into your organizational boundary is secure and better engineered, or has a certain level of quality to it. So back to the fundamentals, thinking about backups. Now, I don't want to bore you on the concept of backups. We all know why we should have them. We know why we should test them. And we should know that we should have regularly updated backups, golden images, if you will. And we're used to hearing about those things for things like transient assets and engineering workstations, or the primaries and secondaries. Those type of things we're used to hearing about backups, but we're not used to about hearing them for HMI images from SIs. Now, this is not the SI, this is not the customer, this is an image I took from visiting a brewery in Victoria, Vancouver Island, British Columbia. So this is not the same customer, just to be very clear. But this was for an SI who makes big bottling equipment, or similarly to anybody who makes consumer packaged goods, the saran wrap and packaging kit. And they had this challenge because they had asset owners purchasing these big machine cells, and they wanted to provide them a best of quality, best of breed HMI image as part of their updates in their process, right? So the machine cell doesn't change, but the HMI images maybe are customized, maybe they're tweaked. At the same time, though, they wanted to see what was going inside those HMI images, because once they usually get deployed, they have no eyes on. They just don't. They also don't have any way to provide attestation. So if you're in Europe, you might have the Cyber Resiliency Act, you might have NIS2, all of those types of directives, and knowing what's inside the products is really key for them. It's also a differentiator. So continuous monitorability of offline assets was a big deal. But looking at that big whole picture here, let's imagine another facility here. And this is one that's doing, embossed printing, your usual kit, right? So you've got a whole ecosystem out there. It's not just the SI. It's not just your OEMs. It's not just your large machine makers that do specialty kit. So I anonymized this last image. I stole this off Google. But you have your asset owner. And your asset owner's got your building management systems. It's got ad hoc suppliers, right, for the forklift, so on, the paper rolls. You've got smaller machines doing, various other things. And then you've got these large commercial machines from a major OEM or SI, right, sold as one packaged bit of kit. But inside of all of that stuff, you've got Windows boxes, you have HMI software, engineering software included, OPC UA integrations, utilities, PLCs, IO, all of that stuff is here. Now, going back to backups, right? This is where this starts to get interesting, because there was a major asset owner who was taking these big machine cells, installing them in their facilities, and they've got thousands of facilities, thousands of vendors, and they wanted to know what was crossing into their customer environment between FAT and SAT testing, as well as business as usual system upgrades during retrofits. And they wanted to verify that the vendors were doing a good job. And this represents a very positive opportunity. This is not yelling at people. This is not, pointing fingers. What the asset owner was hoping for was, if, let's say, ransomware had occurred in these environments, automatically, if changes are occurring, you probably blame the people who came in with the laptop, right? The third parties. Well, the asset owner wanted a way to be able to kind of at least have some level of assurance, and at the same time, our party one, which is the SI, wanted to have some legal coverage, if you will, to protect them from being the ones being the fingers pointed at. So they wanted to also make sure, kind of in a collaborative way, that the software and the images going into these environments was secure. So in this case, the machine cell company was providing HMI images, which actually are backups. And those were getting installed between SAT testing and regular business as usual inside of the asset owner's facility. So they represented a kind of an interesting shift of a software product, a very comprehensive software product, into an environment where multiple hands might be touching it. And this is where we kind of started to think, is there more to this backups? More to it. And that's where we kind of arrived. So again, thinking with my security hat on here, most organizations think of patching as a risk, and that's probably, I would agree that that's true in many cases, and help us if someone thinks about hot patching in one of these environments. That's a whole discussion. Any patch is a change, and if you follow 62443 language, if you follow the majority of industrial terminology and procedures, any change is a risk, and any risk must be evaluated, prioritized, and or monitored. But when you look at the bigger picture, and I know Mike will fight me and say that this is, leaning towards that top 10% of mature customers, and I've had the privilege to work with them. But I think by osmosis, we can make smaller variations of that are meaningful and that demonstrate that we have tact as well as strategic capabilities as humans. So looking at that, any risk can be managed or monitored. You have boundaries, just like you have a halfway line. You've got in different sports, you've got the goal line. We have all of those things here. So there's boundaries. And where is that in relation to the change? Where does it matter? Why does it matter? To what extent can you control it? What can be built out, automated around those boundaries? Is there a process that crosses them, right? That software package coming from the SI to the asset owner, the backup. In what case should you be acting? And what are the benefits of all this? Well, first is traceability. That's great. So when something occurs and you can't roll back because you've let things get too far out of control, this is a great way of being able to track that. It's a great way for the business to know from a vendors, third parties, product suppliers, knowing what's going into their environments, and maybe even stopping it before it goes into an environment that poses a risk to them. Maybe there was something like RDP was left open on all these HMI images. All it takes is one person to be able to get in. Chances are each machine cell has the same passwords. That's what we're trying to at least prevent and try to at least be aware of. So there's this whole concept of making backups just as kind of an element that crosses a boundary, and that's what I want you to focus on. So here we've got these other places where boundaries might come into play: procurement, vendor management, compliance and legal, overall security of an organization. But we also have, if you're a product owner, things will leave your hands, maybe come from a supplier. You've got asset and vulnerability management, which are tied to these backups. What's in the backup that is being deployed on X asset in Y facility in Z region. You have engineering as well. You want to know what's going on, especially in an offline install, right? So these are kind of some of the things I wanted to think about with backups being kind of a piece of evidence. So back to the use case. So backups, the elephant VIP in the room, and it is a VIP. The hourglass, you have this case where there's more attackers, more susceptibility, and higher prevalence of basically the attacker being visible. In the second case, you have a case where in the bottom, you have where your higher impacts are. So these HMI images, because they're on a commodity Windows box, because they're running maybe Windows 11, maybe their default configurations, and SIs generally don't deploy securely. These HMI images represent an opportunity for the asset owner to learn about what's going into their environment. So these are images that are built, they are transmitted. So in this case, the SI is taking a standard brick PC. They are inputting Windows 10 Pro on it or Windows 11, whatever's preferred. They pile in their HMI software, a little bit of secret sauce, maybe the project logic, some graphics, and you have the reference HMI image or the image that you're going to install in your facilities. Now, ideally, these other parties get to see all this, right? So you've got your image, and it might be prepared through different means. It might be a different type of Windows image. It could be something from Acronis. It should go to testing, and ideally it would, right, to test the machine cells function. It might go into your facility, whether it's between FAT or SAT, or go into distribution. Product security should be monitoring it, but many SIs just don't have that capability. So this is a good chance to kind of make them perform better. But of course, that kind of leads to what happens in the post-deployment. So backups, again, how do they get into your environment? Can we stop them before they get deployed? Now, if you're in a facility that's more of a brownfield, this might be harder, but in greenfield, you're in a great opportunity. So HMI images, they get deployed often onto susceptible assets, and they also are indicative of your potential risk, at least from that asset, the main kind of cluster of risk, at least on that asset, right? Because very rarely are a PLC directly attacked. It's usually the Windows boxes that get found first, for example. Now, in our food and beverage use case, right, HMI backups cross the boundary. So from the boundary from the SI into the asset owner, or I'm going to call it AO for now, into boundaries they control, right? So between SAT and FAT, that's one boundary, and that's a shared boundary. In our MOC process, maybe that backup will hit procurement, BAU, services, updates, whatever. Now, of course, there's that transitional boundary. But inside, once it gets in there, we can start to think about where are those backups also providing useful information, right? We want to know on this line, that machine, this image is being used, and maybe it's being configured. We want to know those things for vulnerability management. Maybe we can't write off, or we can't stop all those vulnerabilities from being exploited, but we can at least, or remediate them, but we can apply some compensating controls on top of it. Good news is, if we apply this in a very smart way, we can at least maintain integrity on our backups and know which ones to deploy. And we can use this for other things, supplier compliance and so on. And those things will then be data points that we can then apply and insert into our decision makers' hands. So very holistically, backups, again, are more than recovery. They're actually kind of living, breathing, or at least states in time of your assets in your environment, at least from the Windows ones. So moving the puck from center ice to the goal, it kind of goes a little bit like this. And this is how we saw this process being unfolded between the SI and the product owner process. So starting with the left, the product owners of the SIs, they would track, build, and submit these images. Now this is a very generic sense. And yes, there's a slight shameless plug here for product, but the process is still roughly the same. You'll make your backup, you'll receive it, you'll unpack it. Now, there's a difference with most backups, and I could say this with quite certainty. Very rarely are they bit for bit or byte for byte of the system itself. They are kind of repackaged for performance reasons, so on. Once you do that, then you decompose the file system, the volumes. Often there's more than one, especially on Windows boxes. You might have a C and then a D or a Z for backups. You might even have between 400 and 700,000 files inside of those images, and all of those will need to be enumerated for suppliers, vulnerability metadata. You'll need to want to scan that for malware. Of course, you don't want that to go out the back door and into your customers' hands, because let me tell you, they're going to come knocking, and you're going to have to call legal. And then you're going to want to assess that and report it. And this is no different than what you would do for maintaining the health of a system in an IT enterprise environment, or even in the industrial side. You should be doing these things. Now, of course, you're going to see, okay, so I have this thing, I've looked at it, I can make some choices, right? So on the product owner side, I can do the fix now, later, never, which is not a Dragos paradigm. If you want to find the YouTube video, that's Jonathan Butts, Billy Rios, and a few others. You have, in this case, the PO can also then, query suppliers, find the latest compatible releases. Again, pro tip, the latest release isn't always compatible with your hardware, so sometimes you're stuck at a point of time. Good luck explaining that to compliance and to legal, though, especially with the CRA in Europe. You'll want to document those findings in errata. Now, if you're all good here, we can go to release, we can catalog and monitor, and maybe we'll monitor forever based off of our thresholds. If something is recovered or discovered, we might want to re-release, build the image, test and scan. And you could be doing this internally. So if you're an asset owner that is building images of transient laptops, engineering workstations that are in a high touch environment, so lots of people are touching them, they're churning, you can really start to kind of use this process over and over. And I recommend you do this actually, if possible, with golden images. So at least you know what's going on. And this isn't just true for your modern day kit. Now I'll go back slightly here though. This is a generic process, and you can do this almost manually, very informally. If you're in one of those higher maturity environments or have the luxury of having technology to automate this into procedures or standard operating procedures where you can have a form for a work order and the things get done in some sort of orchestrated flow that documents them, that can do various different forks based off of logic, that's great. That's how you're gonna really take advantage of this. But if you can't, and you just want to champion this on a few places where you know your risks are higher, like transient laptops, like HMI images, or workstations that have multiple parties accessing them, this will work on its own. But to get the most out of investments and other security tooling processes inside of organizations, if you have a SOAR, and for AM, asset management, not account management, you can kind of tie this in. So you kind of steps into these 5 processes, more or less. And I've been through a couple very, very large orchestration projects. And I've also worked at an airline, which literally followed this process nonstop, not just because of legal reasons. And of course, there's FAA and there's similar other guidance, but it was actually to provide coverage and attestation in high availability environments for things like fleet synchronization. And you should be doing the same thing for change management as part of your MOC, your management of change process. So this is very adaptable, whether you're an engineer or a tech fanatic or a cyber folk. So really comes down to kind of orchestrating your workflows, right? So if you think of your backups crossing your boundaries, you want to know where those backups are going to interact with your processes, deployment, final checkoffs, or you want to make sure that it's tied to the right configuration management item or service asset management system, work orders. So you pick one or two of those processes to start with. You figure out what APIs you need. If you have a backup image, do you submit that for analysis? Do you send it by email to Bob and he picks it up off of some sort of bucket? Whatever it is that you need to do, figure out the puzzle pieces that are the bare minimum to make that happen. Once you have that, you can kind of map that to your orchestration flows, your inputs, your outputs. Thinking very engineer-like, this is, we want to augment a work order. Here's what we'll do. We have work order, software to be uploaded or to be changed on an asset. We need an asset tag, at least one, because the image might go to 2 or 3 lines. And where's it going to go next? So once we have the next, then we can validate that. But really what we want to do on the next is to know the logic and the reporting, because we want to guide our decision makers into making quality decisions, or when to poke and incentivize our suppliers to make better kit. After all, we don't want to just subconsciously accept the risk because we need it to make money. No. We want the best thing we can get. And I think to do that collaboratively, this MOC process is one way. So you might want your logic to look like automatic accept on this type of upload based off of Z. You might want it to deny it absolutely based off of these 5 or 6 features. You might have guidance for compliance. NERC CIP 010, 013 springs to mind, supply chain kit and guidance. You might want to send it directly to one person, or you might want to send it to a board for something that might have issues in it, but it must be installed because it solves a certain process errata. So again, this is kind of how we would integrate it. Now, again, that same process applies to how to do this at a project level. So if you want to champion this, and I'll just skip there, so if someone wishes to take a screenshot, this is how we saw this successfully demonstrated in a small scoped proof of concept, and we saw value in it. So someone came along and said, find your champions. And I cannot emphasize enough point 1, because when you are a big multi-billion-dollar company providing HMI images, or even multi-million-dollar, or your mom and pop shop, some people may be looking for retirement. Some people might be looking to not change or rock the boat. They don't want to change things, or if they see security as an added cost. The reality is security in this case would make a better product. And it will actually reduce the total cost of ownership for the asset owner if they can augment all of this. So there's a lot of egos that might get bruised up front. There's a lot of challenges around getting samples. Nonetheless, actually, I think that was where the hardest part was, and then getting towards the final steps, from steps 1 to 8, that can be largely automated or largely done informally, even step 9 to a certain degree. And step 10 is where the variable time piece is. But this is a very nuts to bolts kind of linear project management. And this is how you go from junior league to going to the NHL. This is how you do it. Again, this is all good quality stuff. So wrapping up, as I notice I'm keeping track of time, where is this paradigm also useful and where can it be repurposed? So I like to think about backups being more than recovery. I see them as evidence. So where can we adapt those other scenarios? So I believe in solid technical processes that can leverage other investments. Nobody's going to ask you to rip and replace those systems. So how do we tie into them? Well, here's a couple scenarios that this works. Heaven forbid you are in an environment where you have an OEM that won't let you install EDRs or endpoint management to let you know what's going on those hosts. You can't do active inventories of systems. WMI calls are too dangerous. They might result in a crash. I can think of a few DCS vendors that won't let you do that. So this allows you then to at least ask for backups because you have a right to them. At least you can review them, hopefully in a secure fashion. You could see if the vendor is doing things like applying the CIS, what used to be called the top 8 or top 20, now top 18. You can look at the registry and see if things are living in there. You can look to see if malware scans have had detections in the past. So in this case, in our first original SI, they actually were doing what was called a rolling image. They were not starting with a clean slate every HMI release. So they've been running multiple releases off the same build with multiple uninstalls. You had too many factors that they shouldn't have been dealing with. And so the asset owner in that case gave them a cleanup order. So this is, the OEMs won't let you get in. You can get visibility as one scenario. Now, if an OEM states we do cyber and here's all the things we do, it's time to verify. So we can at least practice that, right? We can see if they practice their security and are being transparent. And this is ideally the most collaborative piece here. No finger pointing, ideally, unless there's someone being very stubborn. It's a good way to get an idea of the shortfalls and strengths when you're looking at products and procuring or doing selection. Particularly, I like to say cyber informed total cost of ownership. You have got 5 product lines. You're going to build a new facility, and they have all these glaring defects. Okay, we need to think about what's in front of those assets. Oh, we now need VLANs. We now need to separate all of our networks and segment. We need to secure our HMIs. Oh boy, nobody thought about that. Okay, so let's think about what the cost is. Maybe we don't have a choice, but that's at least a way of getting understanding of using backups as a piece of evidence. Now we can also then look at this from an asset owner point of view. So if you have a facility that's inside of a region that has data sovereignty, if you have acquisitions that are still relatively separate business units, facilities that are still under their own facade of kind of isolation and boundaries, if you want to get visibility on this before it gets installed, Log4j being one of those cases, how do I know what's been installed? You can, as for every piece of software that's been scanned, you can actually kind of look backwards in time and spot check that. So this is a very useful way, and it's also very useful to augment site assessments. You can take those software pieces and without interrupting the site owners about what was all running and going through it, you can actually kind of pull this back. So as I wrap up here, here's just 3 different use cases where you could kind of look at things and say, I didn't think about this as just as a way to get insight where I didn't have access. You've got data diodes. Great. Well, someone's going to have to give you a backup. So why can't you look at that and you can still get reasonable indicators of how an asset is performing from a security point of view. So my key takeaways for all of this, making backups more than recovery, is, again, they are more than recovery. They show your stateful asset. They show how your organization is applying SOPs, how they are doing cybersecurity, including your suppliers. You can review backups, or in this case, releases from your suppliers for HMI images or others. If you're wind farms, you could do the same thing. There's lots of Windows boxes. Again, updates can also be a form of backup. And we've seen this countless times with some of those embedded Windows CE HMI type systems. Same thing. There's other new Linux derivatives. Again, you're going to have an image of sorts inside of there. And I think finally here, by doing this type of process proactively, it enables you to have a transparent conversation. It might be a little rough, but it allows you to get better hands on what's running in your facilities. It allows you to know how to recover, so you can actually verify that your backup's not going to introduce something worse into your environment. It also gives you a way to ask your integrators to actually follow the OEM's hardening guides. And your OEMs, if they're participating in this, another great way to kind of improve their product and improve what you're buying. So I'd like to leave you with these kind of final notes. And if you have any questions, you can ping my boss, JC Hertz, or you can ping myself here at Exiger.com, or find me on LinkedIn. Any questions?
I think we have an extra minute in case anybody has any questions. Or Wayne, you think we argue about everything apparently, or we don't agree on a lot.
No, you and I have been in a wide variety of environments, right? You're more on the training side, and I've just had the luxury of been in lots of lower maturity environments, you know, the mom and pop shops, the municipalities, to the big ones, and some of them are doing it right. And that's what I want to share here with people: is everyone can do something right, and they can even make this informal. But it's all about improving the practice, and that's where I think that's what I want to leave with, right, Mike?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if I go into small manufacturing or a shell $50 billion, facility, it's kind of, economies of scale, but the basics still apply at the end of the day. So, and I appreciate the extra look at backups from that perspective. So,
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Ron. I appreciate it. Good seeing you as always. And
Likewise.
then, yeah, we'll go ahead and cut off and shift over because we're already up against time, believe it or not. So,
Perfect.
all right. Thanks everybody for coming. All right. Thanks, Ron. Take
Bye,
care.
folks. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye.